Hello everybody, this is Ms. Noah, and today I am going to be discussing with you how to formulate the thesis statement for any AP History essay. This is, to me, the most important element in formulating a strong essay that is going to give you or provide a very high score on the AP exam for either the DBQ or the LEQ. So perfecting it at an early stage is super important in succeeding and getting a great score on the exam. As always, you can find me via email, mnoah@rih.org, on Twitter or Instagram @MsNoahRHS, or on my new website, www.noahnation.org. If you have any questions about the things I'm discussing now, please reach out to me. And with that, let's get started. So as I mentioned, the thesis statement is really at the crux of an effective essay, regardless of it's a DBQ or an LEQ, and regardless of which AP history class you're taking. The reason for this is it establishes an argument that you'll be proving throughout the essay, as well as your sub-arguments, your examples, your supporting statements. It outlines and acts as a roadmap for your AP reader. And it also starts to develop the nuances or the higher level critical analysis that are essential to get that last point on the AP rubric. So for this reason, it's important to kind of understand how to do this at a really early stage. That way you can use it. You can use it on not only your essays for class, but you can use it for any kind of open-ended response in homework, tests, any kind of assessment or project that you can, and not only in history classes, but also in other classes. The more times you practice it, the better you're going to get at it, and the easier and more expedient you will be with your time on the actual exam. I have seen, after being an AP reader since 2010, and also with my own students, that once they get this foundation down, it usually translates into a very good score on the exam, on the essay, as well as the exam. So how do you do this? That's the big question. The first thing is to understand what a thesis is supposed to be. And obviously, it is supposed to answer and directly correspond to a prompt. But in addition to that, there's certain elements that really define or create a strong thesis statement and a strong essay. One of that is something that not every teacher subscribes to, but I feel very strongly that the best thesis statements are ones that are a single sentence long. Now, it's a long sentence, I'm not going to lie, but the problem that I have seen and run into as an AP reader and with my own students is that when you try to make an argument with two sentences, is that the argument sometimes gets lost. That you're dividing your time and it weakens what the strongest part is supposed to be. So you want a single sentence to clearly state your argument. You also need to say something definitive, substantial about your topic, and create an argument that you'll be using throughout the rest of the essay. You also, like I mentioned earlier, want to announce what your supports or your examples are, which will basically be the topics for your 3 body paragraphs in most cases, sometimes 2 body paragraphs. So this one sentence is going to create an argument and act as a table of contents or a roadmap for the rest of your essay. So how do you approach it? It's easy enough to just say that. The first thing you really need to do is understand what the prompt is. And that sounds so redundant or silly, but honestly, I have seen so many essays where students don't really understand what's being asked. So for example, if the task word, which is the word that tells you what you're supposed to be doing in the essay, maybe it's a word like evaluate or assess, and then students just explain a topic without really evaluating or assessing it. You don't get the point for your thesis statement if you don't actually answer the prompt. Another thing that I've seen is kids decide that, hey, you know what? I really don't understand what the prompt is asking me, but I understand something very similar. So I'm going to write a kick butt essay with a strong thesis statement and strong elements, but that don't necessarily correspond to what the prompt is. Unfortunately, that usually results in a 0. You have to make sure you answer the prompt. So take your time on this. Circle and underline the test words or any keywords. Sometimes the years, they'll have years in it. Actually, usually they'll have the years. And underline every little aspect of it that you need to deal with within the thesis statement. Now, that second sentence under number 1 should have a little asterisk. It says you will not get credit, you can read this, for the thesis if you're not fully responsive to all aspects of the prompt, and that's not entirely true. So it's a little misleading, but just go out on a limb with me here. If you make a historically defensible argument, you can get a point for the thesis statement. But according to the rubric, you also get a point at the end for going into those critical thinking skills that are necessary, that the College Board assesses of you. So by specifically being responsive to all aspects of the prompt and taking it in a different direction, which I'm going to go over with you now, it helps you, just your thesis statement, to be able to get to that, to both points. Anyway, as I was saying, since oftentimes kids misinterpret prompts, rephrase the prompt for clarity in your planning. Put it into your own words. You have a reading time during the AP exam where you look over the free response questions, the DBQ and your LEQ choices. This is the time for brainstorming. So rewrite the prompts. Make sure you can answer it. Then I want you to create a graphic organizer about the prompt. Now, quite frankly, this is the part that most of my students hate, and they'll argue with me, but Ms. Noah, why do I need to do this? And the result is in the pudding, as they say. Maybe it's a bad saying, but as annoying as this step is, I can tell you without any question that this is how my students have seen success, and where I see success, I can tell from looking at an essay, reading an essay at the AP reading, and telling when they spent the time to do this. So you create a graphic organizer table. It really depends. I usually do a T-chart type of thing, but it depends on the prompt. So I can't tell you exactly what type of graph would make the most sense for you or for that essay. But I'm going to show you an example of it on this next slide. This is time consuming, no doubt. And when I work with my students as well as my tutoring clients, it usually takes a lot of time. Sometimes on the first go-round, it can take a half hour to really do this. But over time, in doing this on a regular basis, you're going to find you do this very quickly, and it keeps you very focused on your essay and able to prove your argument. So this is an example graph that I kind of mean. So the prompt is, to what extent was nationalism the most significant, there's a typo, factor leading to the start of global war in 1914? And I chose World War I because this is a general slidecast, and World War I is part of the AP US History, AP World History, and AP European History curriculum. I know some of you guys are going to be viewing it and you haven't done it yet, but I just wanted that kind of example. So as you can see from this graph, nationalism is part of the prompt. But in order to show that it was the most significant factor, I have to look at some of the other factors. So that's kind of where I went with this. I looked at, most people are taught the acronym MAIN for the causes of World War I. So that's militarism, the alliance system, imperialism, nationalism. Some people, you might have learned it as mania, because you'll also include industrialization and the assassination of the Austrian Archduke Franz Ferdinand. But I kind of look at those two as being incorporated in the rest. And as you can see from this, I just listed some examples that I could use um, while in order to kind of establish nationalism as the most significant factor. I'm going to show you examples of the thesis statements, but from my experience, and I did this brainstorming right before recording this slidecast, was I actually found that some of the examples I came up with for militarism, alliances, and even imperialism could find its way into nationalism. So by brainstorming, I kind of saw more that connection, and I can use that in maybe not the thesis statement, but definitely within either contextualization, which would precede my thesis statement in the essay, or as examples within an outside information if it's a DBQ, or examples in an LEQ. So that's kind of where I'm going, and this is an example of a table that kind of helps me come up with how I'm going to write this essay. So how do you approach it? The next step is, after you're done with the graphic organizer, after you brainstorm all of your ideas, you come up with your 3 supporting statements. So let's say I'm going to go back, and you can see that I have 4 ideas here under nationalism, though I ended up coming up with a few others. But I have that industrialization caused a need for expansion and a desire for prestige, which equals money. I have the pro-Slav movement because of the Ottoman Empire starting to decline, as well as, and it's not written here, but it's inferred, the conflict arising because of this between Russia and Austria specifically, as well as newer countries being formed, causing this increase of nationalistic spirit, really seen very strongly in Germany, as well as competition for being a military leader internationally, and definitely saw that between Germany and the United Kingdom. So going back over that, maybe before I started brainstorming, I would have come up with thought of 3 things that I wanted to write about it. But from brainstorming, I'm able to narrow it down and say, you know what, I actually know more about this other example that I didn't think I was going to write about, but now I am, because I know it really well. And that's what brainstorming does. It reaffirms your knowledge, and it also shows, you know what, I think I know a topic well, but when it comes down to it, I have a lot of weaknesses in one of these examples. So that's when you decide what you're going to do, write about. So ideally, before we get to my actual formula, your thesis statement should address the prompt, make an argument, and preview the body paragraphs in order that you're going to write it. This shows organization, and it allows you to be able to create very strong, efficient body paragraphs. And that the body paragraphs I will go into in another slidecast. So this is very formulaic, and I don't make any bones about it. There are different types of thesis statements, but the one that really fits in best, and I've seen used the most effectively for the AP exam, are something called the complex split thesis statement. And the formula is to start the sentence off with an although, or maybe a despite, and use an example there that you're not using in your essay. So, this could be another argument. This could be, like an opposing argument. This could be one of the examples, and you picked 3 that you're not using. But this is to show that you are evaluating all of the material, and you're deciding what is most important. And this demonstrates critical thinking and critical analysis and evaluation, that you're acknowledging that there might be something else that's significant or important to the topic, but that's not what you're going to write about because it's not as important. So after the comma, you want to start with a really strong qualifying word. And I see a lot of my students, despite me telling them to do this a lot, sometimes they'll skip that. Quite frankly, I really don't recommend doing that. You want to start with a word. I like the word ultimately, and I strongly recommend you use that. Another word that can go very well is obviously, but those two words strike home to the reader or your teacher that this is the absolute epitome right argument, that you are 100% right. Yes, there's other arguments, but ultimately, this is the right one. Obviously, this is the right one. It stops a counter argument in its tracks, and it creates, it definitely will fulfill the area of the College Board assessment of you. The historical thinking skill they're looking for is argumentation. And if you put a stop and say, this is the answer, then that's why, then you'll get that point. And that's why ultimately or obviously kind of says that. Without a doubt, you are right. Also, in that part of the sentence, you want to specify your 3 supporting examples. You're not going to go on and on like crazy about them because that's what your body paragraphs are for. But it is organizing your information and substantiating it. So in terms of the methodology for that first part, that although, is the split part of the sentence. So that's again where you're giving credence to other arguments or examples. The ultimately, along with your argument, is your thesis. That's the part you're going to refer back to. And again, I'm going to go into body paragraphs later on. But in every single body paragraph, what you have to remember is you're proving this argument. So you have to display or use your evidence in an argumentative fashion. And you need to refer back to just that one part. Not the 3 support, they will be the 3 supporting examples, but what you're referring back to is the argument itself. The use of the 3 specific supporting examples is the complex part. It's what makes your thesis statement, obviously more complex, but it clearly demonstrates your argumentation skills and that you're organized about them. So here are some examples so you can see, and going back to, and I'll skip ahead so we can see that prompt one more time. To what extent was nationalism the most significant factor leading to the start of global war in 1914? So we go back to this, a simple thesis statement, which will not count for the AP exam. You would not get credit for it. This is nationalism was the leading cause of World War I, because you're really just rephrasing the prompt and you're not making an argument out of new information. A complex thesis statement without a split is when you give the examples, but you don't have that that early part where you're kind of giving credence to another argument. So an example, nationalism was a cause of World War I because of growing competition among the great powers for expansion, the Pan-Slavism movement in the Balkan Peninsula, and increasing militaristic rivalries, especially between the United Kingdom and Germany. And that is a decent argument, and you could get credit for it. But we want to make this a stronger argument. We want to make this something that no one can question. And again, since you're being assessed on your argumentation skills by the College Board, it's a really important factor. So let's go on. The next one is the split thesis statement. So you're not including all those complex examples. So although a complicated alliance system or alliance contributed to the start of World War I, ultimately nationalism was the main cause. So, okay, you have an argument here, and this is also pretty good, but you're not outlining what you're going to be talking about, and ideally you would be doing that in order to really show your argumentation skills to the College Board and your AP reader and your teacher. You want to be able to include that. So what you need to do is combine the split thesis statement with the complex thesis statement to get your ideal. And that, the example here is, although a complicated alliance system was a cause, ultimately, nationalism was the most significant driving factor behind the outbreak of World War I due to the growing competition among the great powers regarding expansion, the rising Pan-Slavism movement in the Balkan Peninsula, as well as increasing militaristic rivalries, especially between the United Kingdom and Germany. With a statement like that, you leave little to the imagination in terms of the reader, your teacher knows what you're going to be doing throughout this whole essay. This thesis statement basically spells out your argument for you. By using the although a complicated alliance system was a cause, you're showing that you understand that there were other factors involved. By using the word ultimately, you're taking the fact that you're just saying was the most significant driving factor, which isn't the most active verb, but you're making it into a without question, this you are right. You're taking away any ambiguity that your argument is the correct one. And it really creates a very strong essay and a strong basis for an essay. So ultimately, although obviously formulaic, ultimately the complex split thesis statement proves to be an extremely effective and successful in that it demonstrates higher level analysis, sets up the rest of an organized essay, and establishes a strong argument. But I'm done. Do you see what I just did there? I created my own complex split. Well, you get the idea, hopefully. Once you get used to writing this kind of thesis statement, you can tweak the wording, but I really strongly encourage everyone, whether you're my own student or a client, or you just came along with this on YouTube, to try to keep using those words just until you get used to it. Don't deviate too much. You can use although, while, despite to start the statement, and ultimately or obviously after the split, but these words are important that you use because you're really doing something here. You're creating higher level thinking and higher level analysis that's going to help you get other points on this essay also. And whether it's the DBQ or the LEQ, it's going to really create an very effective essay and a high score. Some additional things that I'd like you to remember: don't simply restate the prompt. You won't get credit for it on the AP exam. Your thesis statement should be one sentence long. Don't worry about putting in every little nugget of information you have about your supporting examples. That's what your body paragraphs are for. The thesis statement should be ideally your last sentence in the introduction. You should start off with some contextualization, which will be on another slide cast, but you would start off with the contextualization and the intro paragraph with this thesis statement and go right into it. So if you're using my example, and let's go back, I would have this as the last sentence here, the complex split, as the last sentence in my introduction, and then my very next paragraph would be one example of nationalism leading up to World War I was due to the growing competition regarding expansion from the great powers. And then explain. And if it's a DBQ, use your documents. If it's an LEQ, use your outside information to be able to substantiate that. And again, I have another slide cast coming as to the body paragraphs, but it leads right into that. Another thing that you want to do is take the main argument of your main claim and reiterate that in a conclusion. You don't necessarily have to. If you run out of time, you can still get a perfect score if the rest of your essay is fine. But an AP reader is trained to look both in the introduction and the conclusion for your thesis statement. The AP reader is not trained to put your ideas together to make a thesis statement. You have to be very, very clear that you have one. And that's where this kind of formatting is really helpful. Now, in your conclusion, you would just put the claim. So again, I'm going back regarding, nationalism was the most significant factor due to growing competition, the Pan-Slavic movement, militaristic rivalries. So a little bit shorter, but you want to put that into your conclusion. And that's also can be very helpful for you. So let's say you're writing the essay, and as you write an essay, you might shift your ideas around. If your thesis statement changes, don't necessarily worry about it. Just write the rephrased version in your conclusion. Again, as an AP reader, I'm trained to look in the intro, and if your information doesn't match up with that or prove it, I'll look in the conclusion in case you ended up changing it. So keep that in mind. Your claim itself, as I've mentioned several times, should be able to stand alone because that's what you're going to be referring to throughout the essay. Remember to use third person only. Don't use I, me, our, we, us. This is a historical essay, and it's not necessarily about you. You can infer you by saying words like, well, obviously, nationalism is the most significant part of or factor to World War I, instead of saying, well, I think. If you just use the words obviously, it takes the question of a counter argument away. When you bring yourself into it, it leads someone to surmise that maybe you're wrong. Maybe that isn't the correct way to go about it. You also want to use the past tense consistently. Quite frankly, the AP reader isn't going to mark you off for it, and there really isn't an area that on the rubric where you're evaluated on this. But realistically, being consistent in that way makes for a stronger argument. You don't want distractors in there. And keeping it all past tense the way it should be, because history is the past, just makes for a stronger essay altogether. And that's it for writing a thesis statement and using the complex split thesis statement formula. I will have other slide casts up soon regarding the other elements on both the DBQ and the LEQ formats and areas of the rubric. So thank you for watching. I appreciate it. Good luck on your AP exam. And again, if you have any questions about anything I have on here, if you rewind to the start, you can see my contact information. Have a good day and good luck.